So it was really interesting for me to see your senior class, especially because I had a lot of those students 4 years ago as freshmen. And it was really great to see how much they've matured and how their participation in class had matured. Because a lot of those same students I saw really struggling when they were in my class their freshman year. So it was great to see how, they adapt and how great they're doing as seniors, So one thing that really struck or stood out when the class started was they immediately wrote down the definition of panoply when you gave it with no prompting, which I know might not seem like a big deal to a senior teacher, but that's something as a freshman teacher I really have to constantly prompt them when they need to write something down. Even when we're talking about vocabulary and it should be obvious that they need to write down the definition, they don't always take that cue. So, and I'm guessing that they know to do that because they've been around longer and know more, the expectation, but also, do you start every class in this way?
Yeah, and they know that the expectation is that I'm going to take their composition books up from time to time and check them, and also from time to time they'll have quizzes over these words. Sometimes I'll let them use their composition books to take those quizzes and sometimes not, but they know that if I let them, they better have it in there.
Right.
That'll help.
And the idea of they contribute a vocabulary word, that's really cool too, because or how long have you been doing that, or what was the thinking behind that?
Well, I've been doing that for several years, and the thinking behind it is, one, it gets them looking in the dictionary and actually looking up words and learning new words to try to stump me with. And then, of course, the incentive that they have is that they get a point of extra credit, classroom credit, that will be a fractional point of any real credit, but they get excited about it. And if they're getting excited about looking up words, I'm happy. So.
Yes. So, therefore, those same words are going to show up on quizzes, so it's going to be specific to that class then.
It will. Each class will have a quiz over the words that I give them, and then it's usually an extra credit component if they know words that one of the class students gave to me, and I said, that's a good word, write that in your books, right. Then they can get extra credit for that.
I just really like that, because they feel like that increases student ownership.
Yeah, I think so.
It's better than just you giving them words and they just kind of passively take them. They
forget about them forever.
Right, and so they're part of creating the list, which I like, and yeah. I think it'll help them remember it more. I
hope so.
I feel like I would remember a word that if you chose one of the words that I contributed, I would remember that word.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing I was really impressed with is their ability to recall information. So how did you give them the background information before, or how long did you guys spend learning that before this lesson?
Well, they got it originally in a reading assignment that was in the text in part, and I gave part of that information in a lecture, especially about the development of the language. And then we reviewed it a couple of times. So this, part of their recall today was the fact that we'd been through it probably 3 times. And so this wasn't just brilliant recall on their part. It's sort of been drummed into them. And it's hard to know what you want them to remember and what can be forgotten without ill effects. And maybe some of this is minutia that they'll never use again in their lives, but I just want to have a sense of how rich our language is and where it came from, and some sense of pride, in the fact that we have the richest language in the world. Right. So repetition is a big part of that, and whether that'll stick or not, I don't know. We'll see final exam time.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of things will stick just because you're tying it into what they're doing, So when you're talking about, Chaucer would have liked that because it is a French word, and and so I could see a direct tie-in between the background information and what they're doing in their application. So I thought that was cool how you chose little bits of the background information and worked it into what y'all were doing today. Basically, the biggest thing that sticks out to me with the work that they turned in is, how much deeper their character development is. It's, like I told you earlier, similar to a news ballot assignment that my freshman students do, and they have to write a ballad in iambic pentameter, and it has to relate, they research the Elizabethan time period, and so they have to write something from someone living in that time period. And so it's really cool to see the difference, between what the freshmen are able to do and the seniors, because that's what's really stood out to me was how, like their use of subtle humor, just, for example, even the way he says, Sarah's, I think this was Sarah's,
Yeah.
The way she says, and tucked away inside his head. I mean, that doesn't seem, all of that. I mean, it's a simple phrase, but that is the kind of phrase that a lot of freshmen could not come up with
Right.
on their own or at this level.
Yeah, it's more sophisticated than your average freshman.
Exactly, right. Because they're still, trying to still push away from that literal thinking, and any kind of, it's not that they can't use metaphors, of course, but they don't know how to turn a phrase quite the same way as a senior would. Even words like gingerly, I'm still trying to get them to use more complex verbs and adjectives and things like that. So that really stood out a lot. And I noticed, they all did a good job of sticking to the rhyme scheme and the meter. And I like how you pointed out that even Chaucer's iambic pentameter wasn't always perfect.
Yeah.
That was good to know. But did you see, and did you pull your best out for
Yes,
this?
and I have to say these are the best, and there are some that really fall short. And if I'd had a longer class period, I probably would have focused on some of those that fell short and why. But since we were filming it, and since they knew that this would be preserved forever, I didn't want to hold anybody up to ridicule and say, here's a piece that didn't work. If I'd had a little bit more time also, I think I would have gone through parts of these really good ones that had some flaws and talk about the flaws a little bit and how easy it is to correct, to get just by moving words around a little bit, how they can achieve the cadence they want if without changing the meaning or the thrust of what they're doing.
Oh, I see. To focus on specific parts that you could strengthen.
Yes. And, in the ideal situation, and when I give these back to them, I'll have writing on that to suggest in a line or two, here's what you could have done to make this better, or here's where you fall short. And really on the ones, there are some that really missed the boat altogether. Mm-hmm. And how I'm going to deal with them, I'm not sure, but I was just trying to give the class as a whole a sense of what really worked well, and by comparison, how if they had tried a little harder, they probably could have done a much better job. They could have done the kind of job that these students did.
Well, I was going to ask about that, about the range. Was it kind of all over the place as far as, the weakest from the strongest?
They were all better than they have been in the past because I learned from past mistakes that I made about what to emphasize. And so we went through the drill of the cadence of iambic pentameter several times before I turned this aside. And even while they were working on it, we did that.
Oh, I noticed they could
on
cue. Yes, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and they know it, and I'm learning over the years how to instill that more firmly in their heads. And so on the whole, all these papers were better than what I've gotten in the past, but still there are kids who it just doesn't click with them. Even kids who are into music, interestingly, who for some reason that when they start using words and putting them into those beats, sometimes they just can't get it, and some just get it beautifully, like these did.
Right. It's kind of like when I have them write a sonnet.
Yeah, I do that.
They
too.
hate it so much because it's really hard.
It's so
if you
structured.
follow all the rules for a Shakespearean sonnet, it's very, very difficult. And I even give them a little template, with a grid, so they could put one syllable in each one. But
that's a good. I may try that.
Oh, you can borrow it.
Good.
And it has like the A, B, A, and so that always gets a huge response from them, either positive or negative, because it's so grueling. I think but I make them do it because I think it gives them a proper appreciation for just. I think they think that poets just sit down and just like jot down a sonnet, and they don't realize how much planning and work really goes into it. So, but yeah, and some of them, really kind of get it, and then some of them just struggle so much with that rhythm, or like you're saying, like they might get the rhythm but not how to make the words make sense within the confines of that structure. But and that relates to another question I had about, did you have any big surprises, and did the students who did well, were they the ones who typically do well, or did you have any surprise stars?
I did have some surprise stars, and I was I don't want to name names, but this one who is not one of my stronger students, but she really got the cadence well, and she came up with some interesting and imaginative ideas about what you want to do. So the thing that's great about an assignment like this is that you do discover those people who have a certain talent that you didn't realize before, and you can honor them in the classroom by reading their piece, and I think it encourages them to try harder, to get more involved, to feel good about the effort that they've made. And then I think there are those students who thought their pieces would be read and they weren't, and some of them it was because I just didn't have time, and some of them, although they're brilliant students, they just don't have this particular skill down well.
Yeah.
But a goodly number of these I expected to be good. Right. What I was surprised, even with the good ones, how they were able to use different kinds of word order in order to get the cadence right, and they were pretty sophisticated with that. For instance, in this one on the Fair Maiden, they're also on the pilgrimage of ours, a good fair maiden was, and sticking the verb in the middle there, that kind of Yoda speak. Is something they're not used to doing, but he did it well, I think, and played with the language the way Chaucer and Shakespeare play with language to achieve.
Kind of, some are better at that imitation than others. Right. Yeah, and I think sometimes when you have an assignment that has a creative element to it, that's when sometimes you get those unexpected stars, some that can really shine if there's any bit of creativity they can latch onto, and some that are normally really good when everything's, very predictable. They struggle when they have to think outside of the box a little more, like the traditional good students, so I love assignments like this for that reason, because it allows some to shine that maybe don't normally in a typical assignment. But speaking of the assignment, I was curious to know how much time they had to work on it. Have you finished reading Canterbury Tales?
We finished reading the tales we're going to read, yes. We just finished those 2 days, Friday, I guess. Today's Tuesday. We finished the last one on Friday. We're going to have sort of a summative assessment piece where what they've been doing so far is doing quizzes on the individual tales. Now what they're going to do is pull all that together and tell me something in this final test about what they've learned about Chaucer and how he uses some of the things that we discussed today, how he uses puns and subtle humor and things like that. So this is sort of the culmination of the study of this unit with their piece, but there's one more sort of analytical piece that they'll do.
Because they're having to apply, their knowledge of the specific things that Chaucer does to create certain effects in his writing.
Right, and some of them did a brilliant job of that. I couldn't have done some of what some of these kids did.
Right. It takes a special talent. I agree. I couldn't have done what a lot of these students did. That's for sure. So how long, you finished reading your last Canterbury Tale on Friday. Right. So how long did they have to write
they had
this?
about 10 days. I gave them the assignment about 10 days ago, and let's see, it was due on the 10th. They had to turn all this in yesterday. I think I gave them the assignment the middle of the week before that. Okay. So yeah, almost exactly 10 days.
Okay. I was just curious because, you know, it's sometimes hard to gauge how much time you should give them, and it's helpful for me to know, you know, at the senior level.
Well, I could tell by some of the questions that were being asked up at the last minute that some of them hadn't started. So I could have even given some of these one day, and it would have been the same effort expended.
Right. There's always some of that.
But I would ask every day, how many of you have been working on this? Don't wait till the end because you'll want to revise and dress it up and all. And I think some of them took that to heart.
Right, right. Have you ever done any kind of peer review with it?
I haven't, but that's an interesting idea. One of the things about peer review of creative work is they tend to focus on only the positive, and sometimes they miss some of the things that I want to point out on the negative. And I think peer review can be good for some things, for creative work. I guess it can be an ego builder, but in terms of actually producing better work, I'm not sure how well that works or has worked for me.
Right, I agree. Sometimes, you know, when they're writing a literary analysis essay or something, it's easy to write almost like a checklist of, because it's very like, well, this depends on organization, you know, but I think it is easier with more analytical writing.
But I think the one good thing that could come out of this, and you make a good point, is that they can discover things that they need to remember, or discover things that they haven't seen before by looking at somebody else's work and say, oh yeah, I see how that works, and I see why that flows well, and I see where it doesn't. And therefore, perhaps by becoming sort of the teacher, they might discover a couple of things they didn't just listening.
Right. Well, I had this urge when I was looking at them, and I did it, I mean, very little, but, you know, to just like mark it up, like get inside it, because one of the great things about the discussion about each one was, you know, and you did this, and then you had them do it, point out specific things, like specific words they use, like the use of color and imagery, and like the rich language and everything, and to have them do it on their own, or they could like switch papers and let them do it, and really like, you know, circle all of the uses of imagery, or like all of these, let's see, like all the things that you related to Chaucer, about
things like subtle humor.
Oh, about like meter and rhyme, like sticking to that, of course, but you wouldn't want to do it throughout because it'd be like everywhere. But like use of humor, like anytime, and not to get like too structured with it, but you could also always do like put a box around uses of humor or whatever, and then create like creative characterization. You know, like I think there are a lot of things about the character she created here that was really different and creative. And puns. I was so impressed with the use of puns, and I feel like that's something that most freshmen just wouldn't be able to do.
That's fairly sophisticated.
I think so.
Even though people call it the lowest form of humor.
Yes. It's not. No, but I think that still shows like maturity, and to be able to use it well, you know, and something. And they could just like, I don't know, like mark it up and then see, because you would want to have more marks, because if you didn't have very much, that means they're not really utilizing a lot of those elements that you're wanting to see them like imitate and incorporate and use, because they're really applying. They learned about Chaucer's style, and then this requires them to apply it. So if they could just see it on the page, they could feel like they'd done that or not, you know.
In this one session, you convinced me next year I'm going to have them do peer review.
Well, or you don't have to. I think it would be very beneficial to have them do it on their own too. You know, not necessarily peer review. You could do it either way. But there's so much richness like inside it. Like you're pointing out in class, like let's look at this word and that word, and that's a great word, you know. And I think it would be cool for them to get a visual of like how it's running through, all these like elements are running through their writing. And then if it, like I said, if it's not very full, that shows that they're not really doing the best job of incorporating some of those elements. So either way, I don't know, that's just something, I like to have students color code stuff a lot so I can see what they understand.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, this would be the greatest, you know, opportunity to like get inside this and make it really visible, all this great stuff that's going on in it. But
so you have different colored highlighters that you have them use? Or?
Yeah, and sometimes it's not necessarily for a grade. It's just, for example, when they write an argument paper, I like to have them highlight the claim in one color and then the 3 reasons in another color, or whatever, you know, whatever you're looking for in that assignment. And that way when I'm grading it, I can see if they aren't able to highlight or locate those things in their paper, then I know that they aren't understanding what it is.
Right.
It gives me greater insight into how they're doing or what they're thinking when I'm grading.
Yeah, good point.
But I think it shows them, you know, when they're like, I'm supposed to highlight my 3 points and I can't find them. If they can't find them to highlight them, then it gives them a clue that they didn't organize it very well.
Yeah.
Or, you know, but I think it would be cool to let them highlight different elements of this and see how rich it really was, you know, because the richest ones are going to be really highlighted or really marked up. So I don't know, I just think that would be really fun to do for that. So you used this one from your other class. Did you find a great difference between the different classes that you had as far as quality?
Well, to be honest, the class that we taped today was my weakest of my senior classes, and I would say the really, really strong ones I found in each class, but the number of the really strong ones was greater probably in my second period class, which is my strongest, the strongest of the three senior classes I had. I had another one from first period that I didn't use that was also good for a different reason. And you know, I could have spent the whole class on this one piece because it's just so well done. It's so mature. But this student does that with everything she does. So she's sort of unusual, and it might have been intimidating. And maybe that was part of my thought process that if they heard this, when I read this morning to them in first period, unfortunately this student wasn't there, but it got an immediate audience response. Everybody clapped when they heard it. They realized how good it was, which is great to see that they.
And she wasn't even there, so that's really powerful that they
it wasn't just
wanted to clap.
A slap on the back. This was just true appreciation of high art.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, well, that's interesting. Do you have a feeling? Because sometimes when I have one class that is stronger than the other, try to figure out, you know, why, or is there something that I can do to kind of even that up a little bit, or do you think it's just the characteristics of that particular class?
Yeah, I have the same dilemma. Is there something I can do to make a weaker class stronger?
Right.
And there just seems to be an energy in these strong classes, and I don't know how it's caught and how it evolves, but it's nothing I do. I think it's something they do. If it were something I did, they'd all be good, I hope, or all be terrible. But you know, and maybe it only takes one or two strong leaders and others going along, but there's just sort of a synergy in that second period that we've got several bright students and others kind of get caught up in that. And I think the same thing can happen in the opposite directions. If you've got some people who are really out of tune and really not with the program, they can sort of pull a class down. I try to do things to avoid that, but I find that it's easier for strong kids to pull a class up than for the weaker ones to pull one down. But
right. That's true. It's so interesting, the class dynamics.
It is.
How everything
really
works. And yeah. Okay. Well, it was really great to see their work, and especially, like I said, teaching the freshmen. This gives me a really great insight into what they're going to be doing in the future, and how their abilities are going to evolve and improve, and it was really great.
Well, and seeing your reaction, I've gotten some great pointers for what I'll do next time, which will make it a better class. So thanks.
Okay, and so you're welcome in my freshman classroom anytime.
Oh, good. I'd like to come in and see my future students.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.